catastrophic flash flooding hits the Nepal-China border.
My family members were swept away by the flood in front of my eyes.
Nepal's Glacier tsunami. That's how officials are describing the sheer scale of the flooding disaster.
That wall of water and mud racing down the valley.
By the hour, the number of dead is rising.
They were talking about the water level that rose by 15 meters.
The videos of the disaster are absolutely terrifying.
There are families of those who are missing, who are gathering, who've been waiting for any information they can find.
We just love them a lot. We want them to come home. And we know that they can make it through this.
Well, homes obliterated, roads swamped, bridges simply swept away. Hundreds of people are dead as rescuers continue to look for survivors after those massive floods on the border between Nepal and Tibet. Over the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to be bringing you the latest details and get more on the glacier collapse that experts think triggered that wall of water. More than 350 people have lost their lives in Nepal. Hundreds more are missing. Many are tourists who were visiting the area. Well, let's give you an idea of where the floods hit. It was along the Trishuli River in the border region, about 50 kilometres north of Nepal's capital, Kathmandu. But what caused them and how did the disaster unfold? BBC Verify's Merlin Thomas has more details, and just a warning, you may find some of the images in her report distressing.
This is the moment a wall of water tore through the Nepal-Tibet border region. What began high in the Himalayas as a glacial collapse rapidly turned into a devastating flash flood, sweeping through towns, destroying bridges and tearing through everything in its path. The death toll continues to rise and hundreds more are still missing. BBC Verify has traced the path of the flash floods using verified videos and satellite imagery. The river Trishuli cuts through the mountains on the border between Nepal and Tibet. One of the first videos to emerge is located here. CCTV footage shows the moments before disaster strikes, the first signs, and then the rush of water, engulfing buildings. From a slightly different angle, just moments later, we see the water rush down the river, sweeping away buses and people in an instant. About 20 kilometers away, a dam still under construction is destroyed. Another 10 kilometers downstream,
oh my God, Mario.
Construction workers realize they have just a few moments to escape. Further downstream, people rush in panic, trying to find higher ground, crying out in distress. About 7 kilometers away, the floodwater rushes forward, destroying everything in its path. And we can see the domino effect. The water surges through the town of Trishuli. From ground level, we see the same bridge, as passengers on a bus watch while trying to flee. And suddenly, the bridge gives way. Look! Downriver, verified footage shows debris, including sections of another bridge smashing into another. A few miles west and further downstream, a video shows another bridge being struck by violent floodwaters filled with debris. Satellite imagery helps us understand what may have caused this. Experts say this is the location of the glacier that collapsed, where a large ice and rock avalanche took place. This boy is one of the lucky survivors. For most, though, the floods have only left devastation in its wake.
That's Merlin Thomas reporting. Well, a huge rescue effort is continuing. Nepal's Prime Minister says nearly 600 people have been rescued today. Our South Asia correspondent, Azadeh Mashiri, is in Nepal's capital, Kathmandu, and sent us this update.
This is some of the military support that is arriving at the airport. All the efforts that are being made to find the hundreds who are missing right now. And over here, there are families of those who are missing, who are gathering, who've been waiting for any information they can find. We just spoke to one woman who spoke to her husband at 8:30 in the morning yesterday and hasn't heard from him since. She's desperate to find information. Right now, aid is pouring in from around the world, and that's because there are also hundreds of tourists who are missing. Tens of thousands of tourists travel to that area every year. There are more than 150 Indian tourists who are missing, 33 people from the United Kingdom, and rescuers are struggling to reach some of the hardest areas. It's a remote area despite the fact that it's extremely popular. Now, what experts believe is that perhaps a glacier collapse and debris triggered this flooding, But right now they're still trying to understand the sequence of events. And they also believe there could be a risk of more flooding because of the debris that is washed into the river systems. But there's also hope. The rescuers are desperately trying to reach some of these areas. Hydropower stations have been damaged. There are fears for the workers inside them who are still missing, but some of them have been saved. And so despite a lot of the fear and the anxiety, there's still hope here in Nepal.
Well, experts believe a glacial collapse and debris flow triggered the floods, despite it being initially reported as an earthquake. So what exactly is a glacier collapse, and is it linked to climate change? It's a question for our climate and science reporter, Mark Pointing.
So what they think happened is that an area of bedrock essentially destabilised, collapsed, brought the glacier with it. And what happened after that was you had essentially a huge mass of ice and rock travelling down the mountainside. Now remember, this is a really high altitude region. The peak below which this collapse occurred, more than 7,000 metres above sea level, and the elevation drops down really quickly. So all of that ice and rock would really have collected a huge amount of debris, of force, of course ice probably melting as it went down, and all that water kind of triggering a surge into the river. What we do know is this region is melting very quickly, driven by climate change, but experts say it's far too early to say exactly how much of a role climate change played in this specific event. So a few factors: obviously we know glaciers melting more quickly in response to climate change, but also the permafrost, that's the permanently frozen ground that effectively holds these mountainsides together. That could have, the melting of that permafrost could have played a role in destabilising the bedrock and so causing all of that ice and rock to plough down the valley. But as I said, too early to say exactly how much of a role climate change played this time around.
So how unusual is a glacier collapse? Here's Dr. Simon Cook, one of the UK's leading glaciologists.
There have been several similar events in recent years, different mountain ranges across the world. Last year in Switzerland, the village of Blatten was buried by a glacier collapse there. You can go back to 2021, also in the Himalaya, where it's a very similar event, ice and rock. So a big chunk of the valley side basically collapsed into the valley below and led to a flood that killed 200 people and destroyed 2 hydropower stations. So these events they're still rare by comparison to, say, a regular river flood that we might experience in the UK, but they are nonetheless, I think worryingly becoming more frequent, I think, in recent years.
Well, there are now fears of a new flood. A lake of rising water has formed at a site along the Nepal-China border, prompting fears it could burst its banks, as Laura Bicker, who is in Beijing, now explains.
All day they have been trying to assess the risk coming from a so-called barrier lake. This is a lake that is formed upstream from Girong port. That is the border area that you may remember was swept away in that dramatic footage in a wall and torrent of water that swept away buildings, lorries and trucks, and you see people fleeing for their lives. That is the central position for China's disaster area right now. But upstream, they say a barrier lake is formed that within the next 3 days there is a danger of flooding. That means getting rescue personnel into that area is becoming dangerous. Now, they do have about 140 rescuers right now searching for survivors. Helicopters have also been launched across the area, and the People's Liberation Army are at the border. They are trying very hard to get as much heavy machinery into the site to clear the road, to clear the debris, to get to where any survivors might be. But it is a very, very difficult operation for Chinese rescuers at this time.
So how unprecedented are the floods in Nepal? Well, our global environment correspondent Navin Singh Khadka now explains.
Nepal has seen several glacier-related disasters, including glacial lakes outbursts, but nothing of this scale. What came down from the mountain, all those volumes of water, ice, rocks, debris. Now that was so big, and what it caught on the way, the sludge, the debris, meters, 15 meters, 20 meters of that buried. So towns after towns, villages after villages, infrastructure, hydropower stations, bridges, roads, all buried underneath. And officials are telling me that at some point, the river was swollen by 15 to 20 meters, which they are calling an event of hundreds of years.
Now, in Tibet, hundreds of people are still missing. The remote and mainly Buddhist territory, known as the roof of the world, is an autonomous region and is governed as a part of China. Beijing claims a centuries-old sovereignty over Tibet. That is disputed by exiled Tibetan communities and rights groups. So how hard is it for journalists to report from Tibet? Here's our China correspondent, Stephen McDonnell.
The Tibetan Autonomous Region, as it's called here, like I said, as a foreigner, you need special permission to go in there, and for journalists, it's rarely granted. Usually we can only go in on organised tours. Now that's because the government has traditionally been worried about the locals there, given that there has been such political unrest, many Tibetans not happy that they live as part of China. They want the Dalai Lama to come back. So you're adding all these political elements into something like this, and there's always the fear from the central government that it will lead to instability. And in fact, we've had an announcement from the organisation department, that's the part of the Communist Party which appoints all senior officials in this country. They've said that officials in Tibet right now will be watching you, and if you do well, this could help your career into the future, or it could fast-track entrance to the Communist Party for non-members. However, if you leave your post, if you do the wrong thing, if you allow instability to flourish, well, that can also hurt your career. So the party is very sensitive about that part of the world.
Well, survivors have described it as the flood that took everything. Listen now to one woman describe the horror of what she witnessed.
My family members were swept away by the flood in front of my eyes. My father, my mother, sister, and her kids are all swept away. They could not escape the flood. There was no chance at all. This flood took everything. My son and I climbed the rooftop of a house and survived, but couldn't explain how.
Well, many hundreds of relatives and friends are still waiting for news of their missing loved ones. Now, they include two sisters from the United States. Their parents, Deepak and Madhu Ahuja, had travelled from Texas to Tibet on a pilgrimage, and their daughters, Ashna and Shreya, have been talking to us.
It's only been one day, but it has felt like much longer. I think we're just leaning on each other and our family and friends to support us right now. We just love them a lot, and we want them to come home. And they have a lot of people who love them and are looking out for them. We're really proud of them, and we want them to stay strong. Yeah. And we know that they can make it through this.
And that is the very latest on those devastating floods on the Nepal-Tibet border.